The door opened, and I certainly didn't plan on giving anyone, or perhaps the ruler of the entire Shifters continent, a concussion. But when you're house-sitting a penthouse that costs more than your entire culinary school tuition, and the door unlocks at midnight, you don't ask for ID. You grab the heaviest cast-iron skillet you can find, and you swing for the fences. I expected a thief. I expected the police. I did not expect the man on the floor to look up at me, bleeding, dazed, and grinning like he just found the best dessert on the menu. I hit the Alpha King with a frying pan. And the problem isn't that he's angry. The problem is, I think he liked it. Welcome back to Raven's Library, Wolfpack. I am so excited to share today's story with you. But first, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? And do you have a furry reading buddy curling up with you today? I love seeing who's in the pack. Also, if you want to support the channel and unlock exclusive member-only stories, be sure to hit that join button below. Now, let's dive into the romance. Chapter 1. There is a very specific sound a 12-inch seasoned cast-iron skillet makes when it connects with a human skull. It isn't a thud. It isn't a crack. It is a resounding, vibrating clong, like a church bell ringing inside a wet pumpkin. I stood over the body, my chest heaving, gripping the handle of the pan like it was Excalibur. The intruder was down. He was sprawled out on the imported Italian marble of the foyer, limbs splayed, completely motionless. "Stay down!" I shouted at the unconscious man, my voice cracking. I have a paring knife in my pocket, and I know how to debone a chicken in under 30 seconds. He didn't move. The silence of the penthouse was deafening, broken only by the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and my own panicked breathing. I took a step closer, raising the skillet again, just in case he was playing possum. That's when the hallway lights flickered on, sensing motion, and illuminated my victim. My stomach dropped through the floor and settled somewhere near the basement parking garage. Burglaries usually involve ski masks, dark clothes, and a general lack of hygiene. This man was wearing a suit that cost more than my parents' house. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, even though one was currently twitching. He smelled like expensive whiskey, rain, and something sharper, something predatory that made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. "Oh God," I whispered, lowering the pan an inch. "I just killed a rich person. The legal fees alone will bankrupt me." A low groan rumbled from the floor. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of deep, confused irritation. The man rolled onto his back, one hand coming up to clutch his forehead. He blinked, shaking his head like a dog shedding water, and then opened his eyes. They weren't normal eyes. They were gold, molten, glowing, terrifying gold. I gasped and scrambled back, tripping over the welcome mat but keeping the skillet raised. I knew those eyes. Everyone knew those eyes. They were on every magazine cover, every news broadcast, every terrified whisper in the city. Rourke, the Alpha King, the man who owned half the city and ruled the other half. And I had just treated his head like an omelet. He pushed himself up to a sitting position, swaying slightly. A trickle of blood ran down his temple, ruining the perfection of his face. He looked at the blood on his fingers, then looked up at me. His gaze traveled from my fuzzy socks, up my flour-stained pajama pants, to the frying pan trembling in my hand. He didn't roar. He didn't shift into a 10-foot wolf and rip my throat out. He just stared at me, with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "Did you?" His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. He paused, blinking slowly. "Did you just hit me with cookware?" "You broke in!" I yelled, my defense mechanism kicking in. "You snuck in! Who sneaks into a penthouse at midnight?" "I live here," he said, the words coming out slow and deliberate. "The owner is in Europe," I countered, gripping the handle tighter. "I'm the house sitter. You unlocked the door without knocking. That is rude. That is creating a hostile work environment." Rourke braced one hand on the floor and stood up. He was massive. He kept unfolding, taller and broader, until he blocked out the light from the hallway. The air in the room suddenly felt hot, charged with static electricity. My instincts screamed at me to run, to drop the weapon and beg for mercy. But I dug my heels in. I wasn't going to be intimidated by a trespasser, even if he was royalty. He took a step toward me. I swung the pan threateningly. "Don't come any closer. I'll do it again. I swear, I'll dent the other side to match." He stopped. A strange expression crossed his face. The corner of his mouth twitched. He wasn't looking at the weapon. He was looking at me. He was looking at me like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve, or perhaps a steak he wanted to devour. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" he asked softly. "I know exactly who you are," I snapped. "You're a billionaire with a concussion and a very poor sense of personal space. Now back up or I'm calling the police." "The police work for me," he said, taking another step. "Then I'll call the tabloids," I threatened. "I'll tell them the Alpha King got taken down by a pastry chef with a skillet. How will that look for your stock prices?" He froze. The gold in his eyes flared brighter. For a second, I thought I'd gone too far. I thought this was the moment he would snap my neck. Instead, a low rumble started in his chest. It grew louder, shaking his frame, until he threw his head back and laughed. It was a dark, rich sound that wrapped around my spine. "A pastry chef," he murmured, looking at me with a terrifying, focused hunger. "You hit me because you thought I was a burglar." "I was protecting the property." "And you're threatening to blackmail me." He took another step, ignoring the heavy iron pan hovering inches from his nose. He was close enough now that I could smell him. Cedar and storm clouds. It was intoxicating. "I am negotiating my safety," I corrected, trying to keep my voice steady. "Put the pan down, little chef," he whispered, leaning down so his face was level with mine. The blood on his temple made him look dangerous, unhinged. "You don't need it." "I think I do," I whispered back. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated through the floorboards and straight into my chest. "You don't. Because if I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be dead. But I don't want to hurt you." He reached out, his large hand wrapping around the barrel of the skillet, covering my fingers. His skin was scorching hot. "I want to know," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, "exactly what flavor of crazy you have to be to swing iron at a king." Before I could answer, the elevator doors behind him dinged open. 6 men in tactical gear poured into the hallway, eyes wild, scanning for a threat. "Alpha!" the lead guard shouted, spotting the blood. "Secure the room. Target is armed." Rourke didn't look at them. He didn't let go of the pan. He just kept staring at me, a slow, possessive smirk spreading across his face as the guards raised their hands, looking confusedly at my pajamas. "Leave us," Rourke commanded without breaking eye contact. "But, sir," the guard stammered, "she's armed. She assaulted you." "I said leave," Rourke growled, the command slamming into the room like a physical blow. The guards froze, terrified. Rourke leaned in closer, his lips brushing my ear. "Nobody is leaving until I get an apology," he whispered darkly. Or what?" I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Or, he pulled back, his gold eyes dancing with amusement. You make me dinner. Chapter 2. Make you dinner? I repeated, the words feeling heavy and absurd in my mouth. I tightened my grip on the skillet handle, my knuckles turning white. I am not your personal chef. I am an intruder defense system that you failed to bypass. Rourke blinked, his golden eyes sliding out of focus for a fraction of a second before snapping back to me. The blood was still trickling down his temple, a stark crimson line against his tan skin. He looked less like a king and more like a very expensive, very dangerous statue that had been tipped over. I think... He swayed just an inch. I think you owe me an omelet, at a minimum. Sir! The lead guard stepped forward, his tactical boot crunching on the marble. He looked from me to Rourke, clearly torn between shooting the woman holding cookware and helping his boss who was currently listing to the left. We need to get you to medical. That's a head wound. You could have a subdural hematoma. I'm fine. Rourke dismissed him without looking away from me. I'm negotiating. You have a concussion, I blurted out, my chef training kicking in against my will. In the kitchen, safety was paramount. You didn't let someone bleed into the batter. Your pupils are dilated, you're slurring, you're making irrational demands. I am the alpha, he said, the word vibrating with a strange harmonic power that made the glass in the front door rattle. I don't get concussions. Physics doesn't care about your rank, I shouted, taking a step back as the adrenaline started to curdle into pure terror. Cast iron is harder than bone. You need ice, you need stitches, and you need to stop looking at me like I'm the dessert course. The guard took another step toward me, his hand hovering over the taser on his belt. Ma'am, drop the weapon. Now. Don't, Rourke growled. The sound was low, animalistic, and terrifyingly final. The guard froze instantly. Rourke turned his head slowly, wincing as the movement likely spiked the pain in his skull. If you touch her, you're fired. If you scare her, you're fired. If you breathe too loudly in her direction, you're fired. The silence that followed was absolute. I stared at him, bewildered. He was protecting me? The woman who just cracked his skull? Why? I whispered. Rourke looked back at me, and for a second the predatory haze lifted, replaced by genuine curiosity. Because you're the first thing to happen in this penthouse in 5 years that wasn't on a schedule. He took a step toward me, reaching out a hand. Now, about that dinner. As he reached for me, his knees buckled. It wasn't a dramatic fall. It was a slow, graceful crumple. The adrenaline and the sheer density of the frying pan finally caught up with his shifter physiology. He stumbled, catching himself on the wall, his eyes fluttering shut for a moment. Sir! The guards rushed forward, surrounding him, their earpieces buzzing with chatter about Alpha down and medical team inbound. This was it. The window. I didn't think. I didn't rationalize. I didn't wait to see if he was okay. I dropped the cast iron skillet onto the welcome mat with a dull thud, grabbed my tote bag from the floor, and bolted. Wait! I heard Rourke's voice, strained and groggy, echoing from behind the wall of security guards. Get back here! I didn't wait. I hit the elevator button, jamming it repeatedly until the doors slid open. I threw myself inside and hit the lobby button, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As the doors began to slide shut, I saw through the gap in the guards. Rourke was pushing them aside, trying to stand up, his eyes locking onto mine through the closing sliver of steel. He mouthed one word: "Run." And then the doors sealed, dropping me down 40 floors into the night. I sprinted through the lobby, past the sleeping doorman who had no idea I had just assaulted a head of state, and burst out into the rainy street. I ran until my lungs burned, until the fancy district was miles behind me, convinced that at any moment a pack of wolves would tackle me to the pavement. 2 days. I had managed to survive 48 hours without being arrested, kidnapped, or executed. I spent those 2 days in a state of hyper-caffeinated paranoia. I checked the news constantly, waiting for the headline: "Wanted, short baker, armed with skillet." But there was nothing. No police sketches, no breaking news alerts about the Alpha King's mysterious injury. It was as if it never happened. But I knew it happened. I could still feel the vibration of the handle in my palm. I was currently hiding in the only place I felt safe, the Crumb and Crust. It was a small, struggling bakery in the artistic district, which was a polite way of saying the rent was cheap because the plumbing was 70 years old. It smelled like yeast, burnt sugar, and desperation. "Quinn, you're doing it again," my assistant Leo said from the espresso machine. He was 19, entirely too relaxed, and wearing a beanie that defied gravity. "You're staring at the door like you owe it money." "I don't owe it money," I muttered, aggressively kneading a ball of brioche dough. "I owe it an apology." "To the door?" "To the universe," I corrected. "I put bad energy out there, Leo. And now I'm waiting for the karmic boomerang to come back and hit me in the face." "You need to relax," Leo said, steaming milk. "Nothing exciting ever happens here. The biggest drama we had this month was when Mrs. Gable accused us of shrinking her muffins." As if summoned by the irony gods, the sunlight streaming through the front window was suddenly blotted out. It started with a low hum, a vibration that rattled the trays in the display case. I looked up, my flour-covered hands freezing mid-knead. A black SUV, sleek and armored like a tank in a tuxedo, rolled to a stop directly in front of the bakery. Then another. Then a third. The street outside, usually filled with hipsters on bicycles and delivery trucks, went silent. Pedestrians stopped walking. A pigeon actually paused mid-flight, or maybe that was just my brain short-circuiting. "Whoa," Leo whispered, hearing over the espresso machine. "Is that the president?" "No," I whispered, backing away from the counter until my back hit the cooling racks. "It's worse." The back door of the middle SUV opened. A security detail spilled out first, men in dark suits with earpieces, scanning the street with professional disinterest. They formed a perimeter. Then a leg stepped out, a polished dress shoe, a tailored charcoal suit pant leg. My breath hitched. Rourke emerged into the afternoon sun. He looked devastating. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than the entire building. He was tall, broad, and exuded an aura of power that made the air feel thin. But he wasn't perfect. He was wearing dark aviator sunglasses. My heart slammed against my ribs. He was hiding the bruise. He was hiding the evidence of my crime. "Oh, sweet cheese," I whimpered, looking for an exit. The back door was blocked by a delivery of flour sacks I hadn't unpacked yet. I was trapped. Rourke buttoned his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and looked up at the sign, the Crumb and Crust. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he was leading a raid. He looked like a man who had a craving. He walked to the door. The little bell above it chimed, a cheerful ding-ding that sounded like a funeral toll to my ears. He stepped inside. The bakery, which usually felt cozy, suddenly felt microscopic. His presence filled every corner, soaking into the walls like humidity. He took off the sunglasses slowly, hooking them into his breast pocket. There it was, a faint, purpling bruise on his left temple, artfully partially concealed by his hair, but unmistakable to me. He looked around the shop, his gaze sliding over the mismatched chairs, the chalkboard menu, and Leo, who was staring with his mouth open. Finally, his eyes landed on me. I was covered in flour, hiding behind a tray of croissants, clutching a rolling pin like a lifeline. He didn't shout. He didn't order his men to seize me. He simply walked over to the "Order Here" sign and joined the line behind Mrs. Gable, who was counting out pennies for a scone. Chapter 4. The sheer absurdity of the moment made my brain stutter. The Alpha King, the apex predator of the continent, the man who signed treaties with blood and owned skyscrapers, was standing patiently in line behind an 80-year-old woman who was arguing about the price of raisins. He looked wildly out of place. His suit was too sharp, his posture too rigid. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the display case with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. "Young man," Mrs. Gable said, turning to him. She had no idea who he was. To her, he was just a tall obstruction. "You're blocking the light. Some of us are trying to see the lemon bars." I stopped breathing. I waited for him to snap. I waited for the royal decree. Rourke looked down at her. A small, polite smile touched his lips, a smile that didn't reach his predatory gold eyes. "My apologies, madam," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Please, take your time. The lemon bars look defenseless." His eyes flicked to me on the last word. I gulped. Mrs. Gable finally paid and shuffled away with her scone. There was no one left between us. No buffer. Just 3 feet of countertop and the consequences of my actions. Rourke stepped forward. Up close, he was overwhelming. I could smell the expensive cologne, the cedar, and beneath it all, the scent of wolf, wild and leashed. "Welcome to the crumb and crust," I squeaked. My voice was an octave higher than normal. Can I help you?" He placed his hands on the counter. His fingers were long, manicured, and terrifyingly strong. I remembered how easily he had held the skillet. "You ran," he said. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. "I had a prior engagement," I lied, wiping my floury hands on my apron. "A yeast emergency." "A yeast emergency," he repeated, his face deadpan. "It's very volatile," I babbled, unable to stop. "If you don't punch it down, it rises up and takes over the kitchen. Sort of like unwanted guests." The corner of his mouth ticked up. He leaned in, resting his elbows on the glass, bringing his face closer to mine. The bruise on his temple was darker up close. "I waited for you, Quinn. I waited 20 minutes on the floor. My security team was very distressed. They wanted to tear the city apart to find you." "Why didn't they?" I whispered. "Because I told them you were a specialist," he murmured. "I told them you were testing my reflexes, and that I failed." "You lied to your guards?" "I don't like people touching my things," he said simply. The weight of the word things hung in the air, heavy and possessive, and I haven't decided if you're a threat or a thrill yet. He stood up straight, scanning the display case again. "I'll take one." I blinked. "One what? A croissant? A muffin? One of everything, he said, waving a hand vaguely at the case. Every pastry, every tart, every bun. Pack it all up. That's $300 worth of baked goods, I stammered. You can't eat all that. Watch me, he challenged. He didn't take them to go. He made me plate them. He sat at the tiny, wobbly table in the corner, his knees bumping against the wood. And he ate. He ate a croissant. He ate a raspberry Danish. He ate a sticky bun. And the entire time, he didn't look at the food. He looked at me. He watched me knead dough. He watched me pipe icing. He watched me wipe down the counters. His gaze was physical, a tactile weight that stroked down my spine. It was the most aggressive act of eating I had ever witnessed. Every bite felt like a promise. After an hour, he stood up. He brushed a crumb from his lapel, the only speck of imperfection on him. He walked back to the counter where I was pretending to organize receipts. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black credit card. He slid it across the counter, along with a white linen napkin he had written on. Keep the change, he said. Consider it a down payment on the medical bills. I didn't agree to pay your medical bills, I protested, staring at the card. It was black titanium. It looked heavy. Oh, I'm not charging you for the bruise, he said, leaning in one last time, his voice dropping to a whisper that made my toes curl. I'm charging you for the insult. He turned and walked out, the bell chiming cheerfully behind him. The SUVs rolled away, leaving the street silent again. I looked down at the napkin. In elegant, sharp handwriting, he had written a phone number and a single sentence. Next time, aim for the shoulder. The head hurts too much to enjoy the view. Chapter 5. I stared at the napkin for a long time. I stared at it until the ink started to blur, and Leo, my assistant, gently pried it from my fingers. He wants you to aim for the shoulder? Leo asked, reading the scrawl with wide eyes. Quinn, what did you do to the Alpha King? Nothing, I lied, snatching the napkin back and shoving it into my apron pocket. It's a metaphor for business. He thinks I aim too high. He just bought out our entire inventory, Leo pointed out, gesturing to the empty display case. I think your aim is fine. I tried to go back to normal. I really did. But normal is hard to achieve when the most powerful shifter in the hemisphere has decided to make you his new hobby. For 3 days, things were quiet. Suspiciously quiet. Rourke didn't return. No black SUVs blocked the street. I started to relax. I convinced myself that the pastry binge was a one-time curiosity, a rich man's whim. Then the letter came. It wasn't slid under the door. It was delivered by a courier in a silk suit who looked like he usually delivered diamonds or subpoenas. He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope, bowed slightly, and left before I could ask if I was being sued. I tore it open right there at the counter. It was a lease addendum, not of ownership change. The property, located at 442 Baker Street, has been acquired by Obsidian Holdings. Effective immediately, rent for commercial tenants will be adjusted to reflect current market value. I scanned down to the new figure. My breath hitched. 300%? I screeched. They raised the rent by 300%? That's not a hike. That's an eviction notice with a smile. I didn't call the number on the paper. I was too angry for phones. I grabbed my purse, took off my apron, and marched out the door. The address for Obsidian Holdings was in the financial district, a glass spire that pierced the clouds. I stormed past the receptionist, ignored the security guards who tried to intercept me, and rode the elevator to the top floor. I was fueled by the righteous fury of a small business owner. When the elevator doors opened, I didn't wait to be announced. I walked straight toward the massive double doors at the end of the hall. I threw them open. "Listen here, you corporate vulture! You can't just—" I froze. It wasn't a sterile boardroom. It was a sprawling office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. And sitting behind a desk made of dark polished wood, looking utterly unbothered, was Rourke. He was reading a file. He didn't look up immediately. He finished the paragraph, closed the folder, and then slowly raised his golden eyes to meet mine. He wasn't wearing sunglasses today. The bruise on his temple had faded to a faint yellow shadow. "Hello, Quinn," he said, his voice a low purr. "You made excellent time." "You," I breathed, the pieces clicking together. "You bought my building." "I needed to diversify my portfolio," he said, leaning back in his chair. He looked smug, insufferably beautifully smug. "You bought it to harass me." I slammed the letter down on his desk. 300%? Nobody can pay this. You're trying to drive me out. "On the contrary," Rourke said, standing up. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. "I don't want you to leave. I want to renegotiate." "Renegotiate what?" I snapped, backing up until my heels hit the soft Persian rug. "I don't have money, Rourke. I have flour and sarcasm. That's it." "I don't want your money," he said softly. He stopped 2 feet away from me. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. "I want your time." "My time?" "The rent hike goes away," he said, crossing his arms, his biceps strained against the fabric of his suit. "The building stays yours. In fact, I'll lower the rent to 0, free lease, for 5 years. It was a lifeline. It was a dream. It was a trap. "What's the catch?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Do I have to join your pack? Do I have to name a donut after you?" "You have to teach me," he said. I blinked. "Teach you what? How to run a country? I think you have that covered." "How to bake," Rourke said, his face completely serious. "I want private lessons, 2 nights a week, in my kitchen. You teach me how to make those raspberry things." "You want to learn to bake danishes?" I asked, skeptical. "Why?" He took one more step. He was so close now I could feel the heat radiating off him. He looked down at me, his eyes dark and hungry, and for a moment I knew he wasn't talking about pastries. "Because," he whispered, "it's the only way I can get you alone without my security team tackling you." Chapter 6. "This is a mistake," I muttered to myself. "This is a massive, catastrophic, tactical error." I was standing in the kitchen of the penthouse, the scene of the crime. It looked different in the daylight, less shadowy, more opulent. The counters were made of white marble that probably cost more per square foot than my life insurance policy. "Relax," Rourke said from behind me. "I hid the frying pan." I spun around. Rourke had entered the kitchen. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt to his elbows, revealing forearms that were thick, corded with muscle, and dusted with dark hair. He looked like a model for a cologne ad called Forbidden Carb. "I am relaxed," I lied, clutching my bag of supplies. I am a professional. Put this on. I tossed him a spare apron. It was pink. It said, "Kiss the cook," on it. It was the only spare I had. Rourke caught it one-handed. He looked at the slogan. He looked at me. One eyebrow arched up perfectly. "Is this a command, Quinn?" "It's safety equipment," I said, my face heating up. "Flour stains are impossible to get out of silk." He didn't argue. He put it on. Seeing the Alpha King, a man who could command armies, wearing a frilly pink apron over his tailored shirt, was the most surreal image of my life. It should have been funny. It was funny. But it was also strangely domestic. "All right," I said, clapping my hands to break the tension. Lesson 1. Scones. They are forgiving, unlike you. "I'm very forgiving," Rourke murmured, leaning his hip against the counter. "I haven't executed you yet." "Flour," I ordered, pointing to the bag. "Measure 3 cups. Do not pack it down. Aerate it." The lesson went downhill immediately. Rourke was a man used to broad strokes, power, force, command. Baking was chemistry. It required precision. He didn't measure, he estimated. He didn't fold, he crushed. "No, no!" I stepped in as he prepared to assault the dough with his bare hands. "You're overworking it. If you handle it too much, the gluten develops and it turns into a rock. You have to be gentle." I reached out, grabbing his wrist to stop him. The moment my skin touched his, the air left the room. His hands were massive, warm, and rough. Mine looked tiny in his grip. I froze. Rourke went perfectly still. He didn't pull away. He turned his hands over, intertwining his fingers with mine, coating my skin in the flour that was already dusting his palms. "Gentle," he repeated, his voice dropping to that gravelly rumble that made my knees weak. "Like this?" He didn't move his hands to the dough. He kept them on mine. He took a step closer, pinning me between his body and the marble counter. He smelled like vanilla now, mixed with his own dark masculine scent. It was a heady combination. "Rourke," I breathed, looking up at him. "The scones." "Forget the scones," he whispered. He released one of my hands and reached up, his thumb brushing against my cheekbone. "You have flour on your face." "You put it there," I accused weakly. "Then I should clean it off." He didn't use a towel. He used his thumb, tracing the line of my jaw, moving slow, agonizingly slow. His eyes were locked on my lips. The playfulness was gone. This was the wolf. He was testing me. He was waiting to see if I would run again. My heart was hammering so hard I thought he could hear it. I wanted to run. I wanted to stay. I wanted to hit him with a pan again just to break the tension. "The oven," I squeaked. "It's preheated." Rourke didn't blink. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could feel his breath on my lips. "Quinn," he murmured, "do you have any idea how hard it is to let you boss me around?" "I'm the teacher," I whispered. "You're a menace," he corrected gently. Suddenly, a loud pop echoed from the bowl behind us. The bag of flour, which Rourke had clumsily knocked over with his elbow during our staring contest, tipped off the counter and hit the floor. Poof! A white mushroom cloud exploded upwards, engulfing us both. I coughed, waving my hands. Rourke froze, looking down. He was covered. From his black shoes to his dark hair, he looked like a powdered donut. He slowly wiped his eyes. He looked at me. I looked at him. I couldn't help it. I snorted. Then I giggled. Then I was laughing. Full, hysterical belly laughs. The Alpha King, the terrifying ruler, looked like a ghost. Rourke stood there for a second, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. A real one, boyish and unguarded. "You think this is funny?" he asked softly. "You look—" I gasped for air. "You look ridiculous." "Good," he said, stepping through the white cloud toward me, "because I'm not the only one." He reached for the bag of sugar. "Rourke, don't you dare!" I shrieked, backing away. "Class is dismissed," he growled playfully. "Now it's war." Chapter 7. The war, unfortunately, did not stay in the kitchen. After the flour incident, which ended with both of us hosed down in his shower, fully clothed, regrettably, Rourke shifted tactics. He decided that if he couldn't own me, he would upgrade me. It started small. New patio furniture for the bakery appearing overnight. Then a delivery of rare Madagascan vanilla beans that cost more than my car. Then an industrial-grade Italian espresso machine that required a PhD to operate. "Quinn," Leo said on Thursday morning, staring at the delivery men hauling in a gold-plated mixer. "I think your boyfriend is trying to buy your love with appliances." "He is not my boyfriend," I hissed, signing the delivery slip aggressively. "He is a guilt-ridden billionaire trying to assuage his conscience because I gave him a concussion." "Right," Leo said dryly, "because men usually send $5,000 mixers to women who assault them. It's a classic courtship ritual." I couldn't send it back. I tried. The delivery guys said their orders were install or death. I kept the mixer. I named it the bribe. But the gifts were just the prelude. The real problem was the presents. Rourke started spending his mornings at the bakery. He didn't just buy pastries anymore. He set up a mobile office at the corner table. He brought his laptop. He took conference calls with foreign dignitaries while eating my blueberry muffins. He became a fixture. A very large, very scary fixture. Customers were terrified. Business actually slowed down because people were afraid to walk past the Alpha King to get a bagel. "You have to stop," I told him on Friday, slamming a coffee down on his table. "You're scaring the regulars. Mrs. Gable is afraid to come in because she thinks you're going to tax her pension." Rourke looked up from his laptop. "I'm increasing your property value." "You're loitering," I argued. "Don't you have a kingdom to run? A war to start? A ribbon to cut?" "I'm working," he said calmly, "and I like the smell here." He looked at me, his eyes dropping to my lips. "It's sweet." Before I could retort, the door chimed. A man walked in. He wasn't a regular. He was a tourist, young, fit, and clearly a shifter, though from a different pack. He didn't notice Rourke in the corner. He only noticed me. I put on my customer service smile. "Hi, what can I get you?" The guy leaned on the counter, giving me a slow, appreciative up and down look. "Well, I see a lot of things I'd like," he said, his voice dropping to a smooth flirt. "But I guess I'll start with coffee. Unless you're on the menu?" It was a harmless, cheesy line. I rolled my eyes, ready to shut him down with a witty comeback. I never got the chance. A sound tore through the bakery. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a shout. It was a growl. It started low, like an earthquake deep underground, and rose into a vibrating snarl that rattled the espresso cups in their saucers. The air in the room instantly turned ice cold. The tourist froze. The color drained from his face. He slowly turned his head toward the corner. Rourke was standing. The laptop was forgotten. He wasn't looking at the tourist. He was looking through him. His golden eyes were blazing with a feral, terrifying light. His lips were pulled back slightly, revealing the tips of his canines. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The message was primal, broadcast on a frequency that every predator understood instinctively. Mine. The tourist swallowed hard. He looked at me, then back at the monster in the corner suit. The guy stammered, backing away from the counter. I forgot my wallet. In my car. In the next state. He turned and bolted out the door so fast he nearly took the hinges with him. Silence descended on the bakery. Leo was hiding behind the coffee grinder. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my throat, not from fear, but from a sudden confusing rush of heat that flooded my veins. Rourke didn't sit back down. He walked toward the counter, his movements fluid and stalking. The growl had stopped, but the energy was still crackling around him. He stopped in front of me. He placed his hands on the glass, leaning in until we were nose to nose. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the gold. Rourke, I whispered, my voice trembling. You just chased away a paying customer. He wasn't hungry, Rourke said, his voice rough, stripped of all civilization. He was hunting. And what are you doing? I asked, breathless. Rourke reached out, gripping my chin gently but firmly, tilting my head back so I couldn't look away. Marking, he rasped. Chapter 8. Marking? I squeaked, trying to pull back, but his grip on my chin was absolute. It wasn't painful, just firm enough to remind me that I could hit him with all the cookware in the world, and he'd still be the one in charge. You can't just mark people, Rourke. This is a bakery, not a fire hydrant. Rourke blinked, the golden fire in his eyes slowly dimming back to a simmering human hazel. He released my chin, his thumb brushing my lower lip in a parting caress that made my knees feel like unbaked dough. He was looking at you, Rourke stated, as if that explained everything. I corrected his vision. You terrified him, I argued, trying to restart my heart. That was a potential Yelp review walking out the door. I'll write you a review, Rourke countered smoothly, straightening his tie. 5 stars. Excellent service. Highly aggressive management. Before I could throw a bagel at him, the door chimed again. But this time, the atmosphere didn't shift toward fear. It shifted toward judgment. A woman walked in. She was stunning in that terrifying high-maintenance way. She wore a cream pantsuit that cost more than my entire culinary education, and her hair was so perfectly coiffed, it looked like it had been legally mandated to sit that way. I recognized her immediately from the tabloids. Lady Celestia Thorne, the daughter of the Northern Alpha, the woman everyone expected Rourke to marry. She paused in the doorway, her nose scrunching slightly as she took in the smell of yeast and coffee. She looked at the mismatched chairs. She looked at Leo, who was trying to become invisible behind the espresso machine. And then she looked at Rourke. Rourke, she purred, walking toward us. Her heels clicked on a linoleum like a countdown timer. Security said you were conducting business in the district. I didn't realize your business involved carbohydrates. Rourke didn't turn around. He didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on me. I'm busy, Celestia. Clearly, she said, her gaze sliding to me. It wasn't a glare. It was worse. It was a blank, bored dismissal. To her, I wasn't a rival. I was the help. "And who is this? Your new nutritionist?" "I'm the owner," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. I summoned every ounce of my customer service training. "Can I get you something? A muffin? A slice of humble pie?" Leo choked on a laugh in the background. Celestia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, nothing for me. I don't eat heavy foods. But I suppose I should support the local economy. Give me a lemon tart. To go." She said local economy like it was a disease. I felt a flash of irritation hot enough to bake a soufflé. I reached into the case and selected a tart. It was from the batch I'd made yesterday, the one where I'd accidentally grated too much of the bitter white pith into the zest. I had been planning to throw them out. "Excellent choice," I said sweetly, boxing it up. "It has a very distinct, sharp flavor. I think you'll find it matches your palate perfectly." I set the box on the counter. On the house. Celestia looked at the box, then at Rourke. She moved closer to him, placing a manicured hand on his bicep. "Rourke, darling, the solstice ball is coming up. My father was hoping you'd join us in the royal box. We need to discuss the border treaties." Rourke looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at it like one might look at a smudge of dirt. He didn't shake her off. He just stepped away, moving closer to the counter, closer to me. "I have a date for the solstice," Rourke said calmly. Celestia froze. I froze. Even the coffee machine seemed to stop hissing. "You do?" Celestia laughed, a brittle sound. "Who?" Rourke reached across the counter, took the box containing the bitter tart, and handed it to Celestia. "That's classified," he said. "Enjoy the tart, Celestia. Quinn made it. That makes it more valuable than your car." Celestia's mouth opened, then closed. She looked from him to me, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure, calculating venom. She snatched the box and turned on her heel, storming out. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. As Celestia opened the door, a flash went off, then another. Through the window, I saw a swarm of photographers descending on the sidewalk. They weren't there for the pastries. "Rourke," I whispered, staring at the paparazzi. "What did you just do?" Rourke didn't look worried. He looked satisfied. "I just announced that the game has started." Chapter 9. By 2 a.m., the paparazzi had gone, but my peace of mind went with them. I was at the bakery late, prepping for a massive wedding order due the next day. 300 cupcakes and a 3-tier cake. I was exhausted, fueled only by espresso and anxiety. I was piping roses onto the final tier when I heard it. A hiss. I froze. "Please be a snake," I prayed. "Please be a snake and not the plumbing." It wasn't a snake. Under the industrial sink in the corner, a pipe gave a mournful groan and then burst. Water exploded outward. It wasn't a trickle. It was a geyser. Freezing cold water sprayed across the kitchen, hitting the ovens, the floor, and dangerously close to the wedding cake. "No, no, no!" I screamed, dropping the piping bag. I scrambled toward the sink, slipping on the wet tiles. I tried to grab the shut-off valve, but it was rusted tight. The water blasted me in the face, soaking my shirt instantly. Turn off, you piece of junk!" I fumbled for my phone with wet hands, trying to find a 24-hour plumber, knowing it would cost a fortune I didn't have. Suddenly, the back door crashed open. I spun around, expecting a burglar. Instead, I saw a tuxedo. Rourke stood in the doorway. He looked like he had just stepped off a red carpet. He was wearing a black velvet smoking jacket, a crisp white shirt, and a bow tie that was currently undone, hanging loose around his neck. He looked ridiculously handsome and completely out of place in my flooding kitchen. "Moisture sensor," he announced, holding up his phone. "Building management alert." "Rourke!" I yelled over the sound of spraying water. "Do something! The cake!" He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't worry about his velvet jacket. He strode across the slippery floor, dropped to his knees in the puddle of dirty water, and shoved his hands under the sink. His muscles bulged against the expensive fabric as he gripped the rusted valve. With a grunt of exertion that was entirely too attractive, he wrenched it. The metal screeched. The water stopped instantly. Silence fell over the kitchen, save for the rhythmic drip-drip of water falling from my nose. Rourke stayed on his knees for a moment, breathing heavily. He was soaked. His pants were ruined. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked up at me, water dripping from his eyelashes. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Me?" I stared at him. "Look at you. You're wearing a tuxedo in a swamp. That jacket probably costs more than my kidneys." He stood up, shaking the water off his hands like a dog. "It's just clothes, Quinn. Is the cake safe?" He walked over to the prep table, inspecting the wedding cake with intense seriousness. "The frosting is intact. Structural integrity holding." I slumped against the counter, the adrenaline crashing. Thank God. If that cake got ruined, I'd have to leave the country. Bridezillas are scarier than alphas. "Debatable," Rourke murmured. He looked at me, taking in my shivering form. "You're freezing." He shrugged off his wet velvet jacket. Underneath, his white dress shirt was soaked transparent, clinging to his chest and abs like a second skin. I tried very hard not to stare. I failed. "We need to clean this up," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Grab a mop." "You are not mopping," I said, horrified. "You are the king." "I am currently a plumber," he corrected, grabbing the mop bucket. "And you have a deadline." We worked in silence for an hour. He mopped, I dried. Then, because the disaster had set me back, he stayed to help. Watching the Alpha King try to pipe icing onto a cupcake was the most agonizing and adorable thing I had ever seen. He held the piping bag like a grenade. "It's too delicate," he grumbled, crushing a sugar flower. "Why is it so fragile?" "Because it represents love," I said sleepily, leaning against his shoulder to guide his hand. "It's sweet, and it breaks easily." He went still. I realized I was leaning on him. I realized his body heat was soaking into me, warming my shivering bones. It was 3:30 a.m. The world outside didn't exist. It was just the smell of vanilla, the hum of the refrigerator, and the solid, safe weight of him. "Love isn't fragile," he whispered, turning his head so his nose brushed my hair. "Not the real kind. The real kind is like cast iron. You can beat the hell out of it and it just gets stronger." I didn't have a comeback for that. I was too tired. I closed my eyes, just for a second. "Okay," I mumbled. "Just 5 minutes." I slid down to the floor mats. Rourke sat beside me. He pulled me into his lap, wrapping his arms around me to shield me from the cold. I should have pushed him away. I should have run. Instead, I buried my face in his wet shirt and fell asleep. Chapter 10. Waking up was a sensory experience. First, there was the smell. Not yeast or sugar, but cedar, rain, and warm skin. It was the best thing I had ever smelled. Then there was the heat. I was wrapped in something solid and heavy, like a weighted blanket that breathed. I shifted, nuzzling into the warmth. A hand, large, heavy, and reassuring, rubbed slow circles on my back. 5 more minutes. A deep, rumbled voice vibrated against my ear. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't in my bed. I was on the floor of the bakery, lying on a yoga mat I kept for breaks, and I was completely, hopelessly tangled in the limbs of the Alpha King. Memory slammed into me like a freight train. The pipe, the tuxedo, the piping bag, the cuddling. "Oh no," I whispered. Rourke tightened his grip, pulling me closer. He was still asleep, his face buried in the crook of my neck. He looked younger like this, softer, the lines of command smoothed out. For a terrifying second, I let myself want it. I let myself imagine waking up like this every day. No rent hikes, no lonely nights. Just this impossible man who fixed my plumbing and ate my burnt croissants. Then reality kicked down the door. He was a king. I was a baker. Celestia Thorne was right. I wasn't a partner. I was a novelty, a flavor of the month. Eventually, he would get bored of the feisty commoner act and go back to his tower, and I would be left here with a broken heart and a business I couldn't afford. I scrambled backward, kicking his shin in my panic. "Get off!" I yelped. Rourke woke up instantly. 1 second he was asleep, the next he was alert, his hand snapping out to steady me. "Quinn? What's wrong? Is there an intruder?" "Yes!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet and smoothing down my wrinkled clothes. You're the intruder!" Rourke sat up, rubbing his face. He looked rumpled and dangerously sexy. "I fixed your sink, Quinn. We fell asleep. It's not a scandal." "It is a scandal!" I paced the small kitchen. "You have to leave, right now. The sun is up. People will see you." "I don't care if they see me," he said, standing up. He towered over me, filling the space. "I care!" I spun on him. "This isn't a game to me, Rourke. You can play bakery for a few weeks, but this is my life. You have a kingdom. I have a mortgage. We are not the same." "We are mates," he growled. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. He hadn't said it before. Not like that. "No," I denied, my voice shaking. "We aren't. You're just obsessed. You've never had anyone tell you no before, so you think it's love, but it's not. It's just novelty." Rourke went still. The hurt flashed across his face, raw and open, before his expression hardened into stone. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. "That you're just a challenge I'm trying to win?" "Yes," I lied. It hurt to say it. "Go find a Luna, Rourke. Go find someone who knows which fork to use and doesn't smell like grease. That's who you need." He walked toward me. I backed up until I hit the sink he had fixed. He placed a hand on the counter beside my hip, boxing me in, but he didn't touch me. "I don't want a Luna," he said, his voice low and fierce. "I have thousands of wolves who will bow to me, Quinn. I have armies that will die for me. I don't need a follower. I need a partner. I need the woman who isn't afraid to hit me with a pan when I'm wrong." He leaned in, his eyes searching mine. "But I won't force you. If you want me to leave, say it. Say, 'I feel nothing for you, Rourke.' And I will walk out that door and never come back." I opened my mouth to say it. The lie was right there. I feel nothing. But I looked at his wet shirt. I looked at the icing stain on his cuff. I looked at the gold eyes that had watched me sleep. I couldn't say it. I faltered. I need you to go. Please. It wasn't a denial. It was a plea for self-preservation. Rourke stared at me for a long moment. He understood. He nodded, once, a sharp jerk of his head. Fine, he said. He stepped back. The warmth vanished. I'll go. He grabbed his ruined velvet jacket and walked out the back door without looking back. I slumped against the counter, burying my face in my hands, trying not to cry. You did the right thing, Quinn, I told myself. You saved yourself. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I wiped my eyes, expecting Rourke to have returned. I yanked the door open. I told you, I can't. It wasn't Rourke. It was a man in a formal livery uniform, holding a thick, gold-embossed envelope on a velvet pillow. Delivery for Ms. Quinn regarding the Royal Solstice Ball, the courier announced formally. The palace requires your signature. I stared at the envelope. It wasn't an invitation. It was a contract. What is this? I asked. The catering contract, the courier said. The king has personally requested the crumb and crust to provide the dessert for the ball. The fee is substantial. He handed me the contract. I looked at the number. It was enough to pay off my rent for 5 years. It was enough to save everything, but there was a clause highlighted in gold ink at the bottom. Clause 4A. The head pastry chef must present the dessert to the king personally, on the dance floor. He hadn't given up. He had just changed the battlefield. That manipulative, arrogant, beautiful jerk, I whispered, clutching the contract. I looked at the courier. I looked at the check that would save my bakery. Do you have a pen? I asked. Chapter 11. I signed the contract with a pen that cost $3, pressing down so hard I nearly tore the parchment. There, I said, shoving the document back at the courier. Tell your boss I accept his terms. But tell him if he tries to micromanage the ganache, I'm walking. The courier blinked, clearly not used to people threatening the king with confectionery-based ultimatums. He bowed nervously and retreated to his armored van. Quinn, Leo whispered, staring at the check the courier had left behind. He was holding it by the corners like it was a holy relic. Do you know how many zeros are on this? I think I need to lie down. I think I'm having a tax bracket-induced stroke. It's blood money, Leo, I muttered, tying my apron back on with aggressive knots. He's trying to buy his way back into my good graces. He can buy his way into my good graces, Leo said dreamily. He can buy my graces a condo in the Bahamas. It's a trap, I insisted, grabbing a rolling pin. He knows I can't refuse the money because of the rent hike, which he orchestrated, by the way. He created the problem so he could sell me the solution. It's classic Machiavellian tactics. It's emotional racketeering. I spent the next 3 days in a state of baking-induced fugue. I channeled every ounce of my frustration into the menu. Oh, he wanted dessert? I was going to give him dessert. I was going to make pastries so complex, so decadent, and so technically difficult that he would choke on his own regret. I decided on a croquembouche tower, 4 feet tall, spun sugar cages, profiteroles filled with creme diplomate infused with the rarest vanilla and a hint of bourbon. It was a structural nightmare. It was a masterpiece. But as the days ticked by, the silence from the palace was deafening. Rourke didn't call. He didn't text. No black SUVs idled outside the shop. The bakery felt strangely empty without his looming, expensive presence in the corner. "He's respecting your boundaries," Leo pointed out on Tuesday, watching me glare at the empty corner table. "You told him to go away." "I know," I snapped. "So why does it feel like he's plotting something?" "Because he's an alpha," Leo said, stealing a macaron. "They don't retreat. They reload." By the time the day of the solstice ball arrived, my nerves were frayed to the point of snapping. We packed the van with military precision. The coquembouche was secured in a climate-controlled box that I strapped in with more care than I would a human child. "Okay," I said, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. My hair was in a messy bun, and I had a smudge of flour on my chin that refused to wipe off. We go in, we set up the tower, we wait for the signal. I present the dessert, I do not make eye contact, and we leave. "And the dancing?" Leo asked, reading the contract copy on his phone. "Clause 4A? Must present on the dance floor?" "I'll waltz with the cake cart," I grumbled, starting the engine. If he thinks I'm going to swoon just because he's wearing a crown, he's got another concussion coming. But deep down, as I merged onto the highway toward the glittering spires of the Royal District, I knew I was lying. I wasn't afraid I'd swoon. I was afraid that when I saw him, surrounded by his court and his power, I wouldn't want to leave. Chapter 12. The palace service entrance was larger than my entire apartment building. Security was tighter than an airport. They scanned the van, they scanned the flour, and one very serious guard actually waved a wand over the profiteroles to check for explosives. "Clear," the guard grunted, waving us through the massive steel gates. We were ushered into the royal kitchens. If my bakery was a rowboat, this place was an aircraft carrier. It was a gleaming labyrinth of stainless steel, populated by 50 chefs in tall white hats, moving with terrified efficiency. "Don't get in the way!" the head chef screamed, running past us with a tray of roasted pheasant. "The king is in a mood. If the sauce separates, heads will roll." "Great," I muttered to Leo. "He's grumpy. That bodes well." We found our assigned station in the pastry corner. I began the delicate process of assembling the tower, gluing the choux buns together with hot caramel. It required surgical focus. I blocked out the noise, the heat, and the overwhelming scent of roasting meat. "Ms. Quinn?" I jumped, nearly dropping a spun sugar cage. A severe-looking woman with a headset and a clipboard was standing behind me. "Yes?" "The king has requested your presence in the staging area in 20 minutes for the presentation," she said, looking me up and down with mild distaste. "However, your current attire is unsuitable for the ballroom." I looked down at my flour-stained apron and comfortable sneakers. "I'm a chef. This is what we wear." "Not in front of the cameras," she sniffed. "Guests are in formal wear. You cannot walk onto the dance floor looking like the help." "I am the help," I argued. "That's literally what you're paying me for." "There is a dressing room prepared for you down the hall," she interrupted, pointing a manicured finger. "There is a package inside. Please change. You have 15 minutes." She marched away before I could argue. "Go," Leo said, shooing me. "I'll finish the caramel drizzle. Go see what ridiculous gown he bought you. I bet it's pink. I bet it has sequins. I grumbled all the way to the dressing room. I expected a Cinderella moment, a corset, a ball gown, something designed to make me look like a pretty little doll for his arm. I was ready to hate it. I was ready to storm out and wear my dirty apron out of spite. I opened the door. There was a long garment bag hanging on the rack. A note was pinned to it in that familiar, sharp handwriting. I don't want a princess. I want the chef. M. I unzipped the bag. It wasn't a dress. It was a chef's coat. But it was unlike any coat I had ever seen. It was cut from blindingly white silk, tailored to nip in at the waist. The buttons weren't plastic. They were gold, embossed with the royal wolf crest. The trousers were sleek, black, and high-waisted, made of a fabric that moved like water. It was professional. It was commanding. It was a uniform, elevated to the status of royalty. I touched the silk, my throat tightening. He hadn't tried to change me. He hadn't tried to force me into his world's mold. He had looked at who I was, a baker, a worker, a boss, and he had given me armor. I stripped off my dirty clothes and pulled on the silk. It fit perfectly. I buttoned the gold studs all the way to my chin. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a commoner crashing a party. I looked like the general of the kitchen. I smoothed the fabric, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Okay, Rourke," I whispered to the empty hallway. "You want a show? Let's give them a show." Chapter 13. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds, velvet, and apex predators. I stood behind the massive double doors, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Next to me, Leo was pushing the gold cart that held the 4-foot tower of profiteroles. "There are so many people," Leo squeaked, peeking through the crack in the doors. "I think I see a duke. I think I see a movie star. Quinn, is that the Prime Minister?" "Focus, Leo," I hissed, smoothing my silk jacket. "It's just a room full of hungry people. They're just customers with better jewelry." "And sharper teeth," Leo added unhelpfully. Inside the ballroom, the music was a polite orchestral swell. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone, the scent of hundreds of powerful shifters in one enclosed space. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, sat the Alpha King. Even from this distance, Rourke was impossible to miss. He was sprawling on a velvet throne like a man serving a prison sentence. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, a red sash across his chest, and a crown that looked heavy and archaic. He looked bored, lethally, violently bored. Lady Celestia Thorne was standing next to him, whispering something in his ear and laughing. Rourke didn't even turn his head. He was staring at the floor, twirling a champagne flute with dangerous agitation. Then, the Master of Ceremonies tapped his microphone. "Lords and ladies," the voice boomed, "presenting the royal dessert. Crafted by the renowned pastry chef, Ms. Quinn of the Crumb and Crust." The double doors swung open. The conversation died instantly. All heads turned toward us. "Go," I commanded quietly. Leo pushed the cart. I walked beside it. Walking into that room felt like walking into a lion's den wearing a steak necklace. The silence was heavy. Hundreds of eyes tracked us. I could hear the whispers starting. Who is she? Is that a chef's coat? Why is she wearing gold buttons? Isn't that the human girl from the rumors? I kept my chin high. I fixed my eyes on the dais. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at the king. Rourke hadn't moved when the doors opened, but the moment I stepped across the threshold, he froze. He stopped twirling the glass. His head snapped up. He didn't see me yet. I was too far away. But he smelled me. I saw his nostrils flare. I saw the boredom vanish from his face, replaced by a sudden, intense focus that made the hair on my arms stand up. He stood up. The movement was so abrupt that Celestia stumbled back. The music faltered. You didn't just stand up when the king was seated. Rourke ignored the protocol. He ignored the court. He stepped down from the dais, his golden eyes locking onto me across the expanse of the polished dance floor. He started walking toward me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. They scrambled to get out of his way. He wasn't walking like a host greeting a guest. He was walking like a wolf closing in on its mate. I stopped the cart in the center of the room. My hands were shaking, but I clasped them behind my back. Rourke didn't stop until he was 3 feet away. He loomed over me, blocking out the light, blocking out the crowd. He looked at the silk jacket. He looked at the gold buttons. He looked at my face. A slow, devastating smile spread across his lips. "Hello, burglar," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear it, yet heavy enough to carry the weight of the crown. "Your Majesty," I replied, forcing my voice to be steady. "Delivery for the crown." "I see that," he murmured. He didn't look at the pastry tower. "You wore the jacket." "It fits," I said. "Thank you." "I wanted everyone to know," he said, taking a step closer, invading my personal space in front of 1,000 witnesses. "Know what?" I breathed. "That you don't belong to the kitchen," he whispered, reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "You belong to the king." Suddenly, a sharp, clattering sound broke the moment. Lady Celestia had followed him down. She accidentally bumped into a waiter carrying a tray of red wine. The tray tipped. The glass shattered, and a wave of dark crimson liquid splashed across the back of my pristine white silk jacket. The room gasped. I froze. The cold wetness soaked through the silk instantly. I stood there, ruined. The symbol of my professionalism, the armor he had given me, was stained red. I heard Celestia's mock apologetic voice behind me. "Oh dear, how clumsy. But really, staff shouldn't be on the dance floor anyway." I closed my eyes, waiting for the humiliation to hit, waiting for security to usher me out. Then I heard a sound that stopped my heart. Rourke growled. It wasn't the playful growl from the bakery. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated violence. The room went deathly silent. I opened my eyes. Rourke wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking over my shoulder at Celestia. His eyes were glowing so bright they looked like molten coins. "Give me a napkin," he commanded. The waiter, trembling, handed him a white linen cloth. Rourke turned back to me. The rage in his eyes vanished, replaced by a terrifying tenderness. "Turn around," he whispered. "Rourke, don't," I hissed. "Everyone is watching. Just let me go." "Turn around." I turned, and then, in front of the press, the nobility, and the cameras, the Alpha King dropped to his knees. Chapter 14. The sound of a collective gasp in a room with fantastic acoustics is a terrifying thing. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the ballroom by a giant vacuum. I stared down at the top of Rourke's head. His dark hair was gleaming under the chandeliers. He was on one knee, on the floor, at my feet. The Alpha King, the man who owned skyscrapers and commanded armies, was kneeling in a puddle of spilled Cabernet Sauvignon, holding a linen napkin. "Rourke," I hissed, my voice vibrating with panic. "Get up. You look insane. You are ruining your suit." "Stay still," he commanded softly. He didn't scrub. He didn't wipe frantically. He pressed the white linen against the back of my silk jacket with gentle, deliberate pressure, absorbing the wine. His large hand was warm against my lower back, the heat seeping through the ruined fabric and branding my skin. The intimacy of it was staggering. He wasn't just cleaning a stain. He was tending to a wound. "Rourke, darling." Celestia's voice wavered somewhere behind me. It was high, brittle, and edged with genuine fear. "What are you doing? It's just the help. The cleaners will handle it. Please, get up. You're making a scene." Rourke paused. He didn't look up. He didn't turn around. But the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "A scene," Rourke repeated. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room like a crack of thunder. He slowly peeled the wine-soaked napkin away from my jacket, checking his work. Then he stood up. He rose like a tide, powerful, inevitable, and terrifying. He turned slowly to face Celestia. She took a step back, her hands clutching her clutch so hard her knuckles were white. The smirk was gone from her face, replaced by the pale, wide-eyed look of prey realizing the fence is electrified. "You ruined her jacket," Rourke said. It was a statement of fact, delivered with zero emotion. "It was an accident," Celestia stammered, looking around for support. The crowd looked away. Nobody was going to jump in front of this train. "I tripped. And besides, it's just a uniform. I'll buy her a new one. I'll buy her 10. "It is not a uniform," Rourke growled, stepping closer to her. "It is my crest. She wears my colors." He held up the stained napkin, letting it drop to the floor at Celestia's feet. It landed with a soft plap that echoed in the silence. "You stained my colors, Celestia," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And you did it to humiliate the only person in this room who actually works for a living." "Rourke, please," she whispered, tears of embarrassment welling up. "It's just a baker." "She is the chef," he corrected. "And as of this moment, she is under royal protection." He turned his back on her. He dismissed the daughter of a powerful alpha like she was a gnat. He turned back to me, his eyes softening instantly as they scanned my face. "Are you burned?" he asked, ignoring the hundreds of people staring at us. "Was the wine hot?" "It was room temperature," I managed to say, my heart doing gymnastics in my chest. "Rourke, everyone is staring. We need to leave. We need to go back to the kitchen." "No," he said, shaking his head. "We have a contract to fulfill." "The contract?" I blinked, confused. "You want the dessert? It's right there." I pointed to the cart of profiteroles that Leo was guarding with his life. "Clause 4A," Rourke quoted, a wicked glint returning to his golden eyes. "The presentation must occur on the dance floor." He reached out his hand, palm up, a silent invitation, a public challenge. "I am covered in wine," I whispered furiously. "I smell like a dive bar." "You smell like vanilla and trouble,"
he countered. "Dance with me, Quinn, or I'm going to kneel again, and next time, I'll stay there until you say yes."
Chapter 15. I looked at his hand. It was broad, calloused, and steady. I looked at his face. He wasn't playing a game anymore. He was putting his reputation, his dignity, and his pride on the line for me. If I walked away now, I would save face, but I would break him. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and placed my hand in his. "If you step on my toes," I warned, "I'm charging extra." Rourke's fingers closed around mine, warm and possessive. He pulled me in.
"Deal."
He signaled the orchestra with a sharp nod. The strings swelled into a waltz, something sweeping and romantic that felt entirely at odds with the fact that I was wearing sneakers and a wine-stained jacket. Rourke placed his other hand on my waist, right over the damp silk. He didn't flinch at the wetness. He pulled me flush against him, destroying the polite distance required for a ballroom dance. We began to move. I expected to be clumsy. I expected to trip. But Rourke was a force of nature. He didn't just lead, he carried the momentum. He guided me through the turns with effortless strength, making me feel like I was floating. The crowd blurred into a wash of color. The whispers faded. It was just the two of us, spinning in the center of the world. "You're surprisingly light on your feet," I murmured, looking up at him. "For a man who usually just sits on a throne and glares." "I have many hidden talents," Rourke replied, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm also excellent at dishwashing, and I make a terrible plumber." I laughed. The sound bubbled up before I could stop it, bright and real in the stuffy room. "You were a terrible plumber. You used a tuxedo as a towel."
"It was effective."
He shrugged. He spun me out and pulled me back in, the motion dipping me slightly. "Quinn?" "Yes?"
"They're terrified of you," he said, nodding vaguely toward the perimeter of the room.
I glanced over his shoulder. He was right. The dukes and duchesses were watching us with wide, fearful eyes. They weren't looking at the stain anymore. They were looking at the way the king was holding the baker. "They're not terrified of me," I corrected. "They're terrified of you. They think you've lost your mind."
"Maybe I have,"
he whispered, leaning down so his forehead rested against mine. We were still dancing, swaying in a tight circle.
"I haven't looked at a budget report in 3 days. I ate a carbohydrate. I publicly insulted a diplomat. I am unraveling."
"You seem fine to me," I breathed.
"I am not fine," he growled softly. "I am obsessed. I wake up thinking about you."
"I go to sleep thinking about you. I look at this room full of people who want my power, and all I can think is that none of them would dare to hit me with a frying pan." "Is that really the bar?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Blunt force trauma?"
"The bar is honesty," he said, intense. "You see me, Quinn, not the title, not the money. You see the man, and you aren't impressed."
"I'm a little impressed," I admitted.
"You cleaned my jacket. I would burn this palace down if you asked me to," he stated calmly.
The music reached a crescendo. Rourke stopped spinning. He held me there, in the center of the silence, his arm like an iron band around my waist.
"Be my mate," he said.
It wasn't a question. It wasn't a proposal. It was a plea. My heart stopped. The word hung between us. Mate. It meant everything. It meant forever. It meant sharing a soul, a life, a pack. "Rourke," I whispered, panic warring with desire. "I can't just. I have a bakery. I have a life. I can't be a queen. I don't know how to wave. I hate pantyhose.
Keep the bakery, he said immediately. Burn the pantyhose. I don't care. Dictate the terms. Write them on a napkin. I'll sign anything. He looked at me with such raw, open hope that it broke me. I started. Suddenly, a flashbulb went off, then another. The spell broke. The press had found their courage. Shouts erupted from the sidelines. "Your Majesty, is this an engagement? Who is she? Miss Quinn, look here!" Rourke's head snapped up. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the alpha mask. He shifted instantly, moving his body to shield me from the cameras. "We're leaving," he announced. He didn't release my hand. He grabbed it tighter. He didn't walk back to the throne. He turned toward the double doors, dragging me with him. "Wait!" I gasped, stumbling to keep up with his long strides. "The dessert! The tower! We didn't cut it!" "Let them eat cake," Rourke growled, kicking the doors open. Chapter 16. We burst into the hallway, leaving the chaos of the ballroom behind. Rourke didn't slow down. He marched down the corridor, his cape billowing. Metaphorically, he wasn't wearing a cape, but he had the energy of a man who should be. "Rourke, slow down!" I yelped, my sneakers squeaking on the polished marble. "Where are we going? The van is back at the loading dock. Leo is still in there." "Leo will be fine," Rourke said, not stopping. "My security will escort him home. He'll probably enjoy the ride in the armored convoy." "He will," I admitted, breathless. "He loves drama. But where are we going?" "Away," he said, "before I bite a photographer." He bypassed the elevators and kicked open a side door that led to a private stairwell. We descended 2 flights of stairs, his hand never leaving mine. We emerged into a private, underground garage that looked more like a showroom for the Batmobile. There was a single car waiting, a sleek, black, low-slung beast of a machine that looked fast enough to break the sound barrier. Rourke opened the passenger door. "Get in." "I am not getting in that," I protested. "That is not a car. That is a midlife crisis on wheels." "Quinn," he warned, his hand on the door frame. "Get in." I got in. The leather smelled like him. Rourke vaulted into the driver's seat, hit the ignition button, and the engine roared to life with a sound that vibrated through my bones. We shot out of the garage and into the night, leaving the palace and its scandal in the rearview mirror. The drive was silent. Rourke drove with aggressive precision, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I watched the city blur past, the lights, the river, the skyline that he owned. My adrenaline was crashing. I slumped in the seat, looking down at my wine-stained chef's jacket. I felt ridiculous. I felt exhilaratingly alive. "You kidnapped me," I said finally, breaking the silence. "I rescued you," he corrected, eyes on the road. "Rescued me from what? The dessert course?" "From the sharks," he said. He glanced at me. "If we had stayed, they would have eaten you alive. They would have asked you about your lineage, your bank account, your past relationships. I wasn't going to let them dissect you." I looked at his profile, the sharp jawline, the determined set of his mouth. He really believed that. He wasn't trying to control me. He was trying to protect me. "Where are we going?" I asked softly. "This isn't the way to the bakery." "We aren't going to the bakery," he said. "The press is already camping out there. If you go home tonight, you won't sleep." "Then where?" Rourke signaled a turn.
We headed toward the skyline, toward the tallest building in the city.
"The penthouse," he said.
The scene of the crime? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Are you taking me back to the place where I assaulted you?
"It seems appropriate," he murmured, "since we have unfinished business."
He pulled the car into the private garage of the obsidian tower. He killed the engine. The silence returned, heavy and thick with unsaid things. He didn't open his door. He turned in his seat to face me. The dashboard lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the gold in his eyes.
"You didn't answer me," he said quietly.
"Answer what?"
"In the ballroom," he said. "I asked you to be my mate. You didn't say no."
"I didn't say yes either," I whispered.
"But you didn't say no," he repeated.
He reached out, his hand hovering over my cheek before he dropped it, as if afraid to touch me now that the adrenaline was gone.
"Quinn, I am done playing games. I am done buying pastries I don't eat just to see you. I want you here with me."
"I can't just be your queen, Rourke," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not cut out for it. I throw pans, I yell, I get flour in my hair."
"I will embarrass you. You will ground me," he corrected. "I don't need a statue. I need you."
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was wrinkled. It was stained with grease. It was the napkin from the first day. "What is that?" I asked.
"The terms," he said.
He handed me a pen, a cheap plastic Bic pen he must have stolen from my bakery.
"Write it down," he commanded softly. "Everything you want, every condition, every demand. If you want the bakery, write it. If you want weekends off, write it. If you want me to abdicate and move to a farm, write it."
I took the pen. I looked at the napkin. I looked at him.
"You're serious," I breathed. "Deadly," he said. "Write your treaty, Quinn. Because once you sign it, I'm never letting you go."
I hesitated. Then, slowly, I pressed the pen to the napkin. "First condition," I said aloud, writing as I spoke. "I drive." Rourke blinked.
"What?"
"This car," I said, looking up at him with a grin. "I get to drive it." Rourke stared at me. Then a slow, wicked smile spread across his face.
"Done," he said. "What else?"
"Oh," I said, leaning back against the leather seat. "I'm just getting started." Chapter 17. The plastic pen scratched loudly against the grease-stained linen napkin. It was, without a doubt, the most unprofessional legal document in the history of the monarchy. "Item 3, I muttered, pressing the napkin against the dashboard to steady my hand. "The bakery remains an independent entity. You do not buy it. You do not optimize it. You do not send corporate consultants in suits to tell me my profit margins on muffins are inefficient." Rourke watched me write, his arm draped over the steering wheel, his eyes tracing the movement of the pen with terrifying intensity.
"Agreed," he said immediately. "I prefer your muffins inefficient."
"Item 4, I continued, my handwriting getting smaller as I ran out of white space. "No royal duties on Sundays. Sundays are for testing recipes and wearing sweatpants. If you try to put me in a tiara before noon on a Sunday, I will abdicate."
"I can ban tiaras on Sundays,"
Rourke murmured. He reached out, his finger tracing the line of my jaw.
"Anything else?"
"I'm not done." I swatted his hand away, though my heart rate spiked. Item 5. Domestic labor. Rourke blinked. I have staff for that. Not in my house, I said, looking him dead in the eye. If you stay at my apartment, or if we are whatever this is, you pull your weight. That means you do the dishes. Manually, with a sponge. No calling the royal cleaning crew. A slow, disbelief-filled smile spread across his face. You want the Alpha King to scrub plates? It builds character, I said primly, and it keeps you humble. Do we have a deal? Rourke leaned across the center console. The leather creaked. He took the pen from my hand and tossed it onto the dashboard. Then he took the napkin, folded it reverently, and slid it into his tuxedo pocket, right over his heart. We have a deal, he whispered. Now stop writing. I want to take you upstairs. The elevator ride to the penthouse was the longest 40 seconds of my life. We stood side by side, not touching, but the air between us was so thick with tension, it felt like we were underwater. I watched the numbers climb, 10, 20, 30, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. I wasn't just going up to an apartment. I was going up to a life I wasn't sure I fit into. The doors slid open. The foyer was exactly as I remembered it from the night of the crime. The imported marble, the modern art, the spot on the floor where he had fallen. I walked to the center of the room and stopped, staring at the floor. This is where it happened, I said softly. The spot where I almost killed you. Rourke walked up behind me. He didn't stop until his chest brushed my back. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me back against him, burying his face in the crook of my neck. Best headache of my life, he murmured against my skin. I gave you a concussion, Rourke. You gave me a challenge, he corrected. He turned me around in his arms, his hands sliding up to cup my face. The playfulness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a raw, naked hunger. I spent centuries being bored, Quinn. Everyone says yes to me. Everyone bows. Then you came out of the dark with a frying pan and told me to get out. He leaned his forehead against mine. I knew right then. I knew I was in trouble. I'm still trouble, I warned him. I'm messy. I'm stubborn. I will never learn the proper way to curtsy. Good, he breathed. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a claiming. It was a seal on the contract I'd just written. He kissed me like he was starving, and I was the only sustenance in the world. I grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo, pulling him closer, melting into the heat and the scent of cedar and rain. For the first time all night, maybe for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was fighting for my place in the world. I felt like I had already won. The sun hitting the penthouse windows the next morning was aggressive. It wasn't the polite, filtered light I got in my apartment. It was high-altitude, unfiltered, blinding glory. I groaned, pulling a silk sheet over my head. Coffee, a voice grumbled from somewhere nearby. I peeked out from the fortress of pillows. Rourke was standing by the bed. He was wearing gray sweatpants and nothing else. The sight was distracting. He held a mug in his hand, looking at it with deep suspicion. I made it, he announced. I used the machine. It made angry noises, but brown liquid came out. I sat up, taking the mug. I took a sip. It was terrible. It tasted like burnt rubber and good intentions. It's delicious, I lied, smiling at him. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He looked at me, his hair messy, the alpha mask completely gone. He looked human. The napkin, he said, pulling the wrinkled paper from the nightstand.
You missed a clause.
I did?
Clause 6, he said, tapping the paper. The duration.
I swallowed, setting the terrible coffee down. What's the duration?
Forever, he said. No renewal option, no exit strategy. You sign this, Quinn, and you're stuck with me. You're stuck with the press, the politics, the bad coffee, and the occasional concussion.
He handed me the pen again. I looked at the man who had knelt in wine for me. I looked at the man who was willing to wash dishes just to be in my kitchen. I took the pen. I didn't hesitate. I scrawled my name across the bottom of the grease-stained napkin. Signed, I whispered. Rourke took the napkin. He didn't smile. He looked relieved, as if he had genuinely been afraid I would run. Good, he said. He stood up and walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling curtains that covered the far wall.
Because we have an audience.
He hit a button on the wall. The curtain slid open. I gasped. Down below, 40 stories down, the streets surrounding the tower were packed. It wasn't just paparazzi anymore. It was thousands of people. News vans, helicopters circling in the distance, crowds pressing against the barricades. They were waiting.
They know you're here, Rourke said, looking down at the chaos. They know I took you. The palace issued a statement this morning.
What statement? I asked, scrambling out of bed and clutching the sheet to my chest. What did you tell them? Rourke turned back to me, his silhouette framed by the morning light and the city he ruled.
I told them, he said calmly, that the king has finally surrendered.
He held out his hand to me.
Are you ready to go down there and accept your victory?
Chapter 18. The Kingmaker. I'm wearing a sheet, I pointed out, staring down at the ocean of people 40 stories below. If I go out there now, I'm not accepting victory. I'm accepting an indecency charge. Rourke laughed, a low rumble that vibrated against my back.
We'll get you clothes, Quinn. But you can't hide anymore. You signed the napkin. You're legal.
I looked at the crowd. I saw the signs. Long live the chef. Show us the skillet. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was my life now. I took a deep breath, released the death grip I had on the silk sheet, and turned back to the man who had turned my quiet, flower-dusted existence into a national event. Okay, I said, squeezing his hand. Let's go. But if anyone asks, I'm driving. 7 months later.
Order up. 2 lattes, oat milk, extra hot, 1 bear claw, and for the love of all that is holy, someone stop the alpha from eating the inventory.
I slammed a tray of fresh croissants onto the counter of the Crumb and Crust, wiping sweat from my forehead. The bakery was absolute chaos. It had been chaos for 6 months straight. Ever since the napkin treaty was signed, my little shop had transformed from a neighborhood secret into a pilgrimage site. Tourists lined up around the block, not just for the pastries, but for the show. And the show was currently standing in the corner, wearing a bespoke 3-piece Italian suit protected by a neon green apron that said, "Don't feed the animal." Rourke was frosting cupcakes. Badly.
I am quality control,
Rourke argued, licking vanilla buttercream off his thumb with a deliberation that made 3 women at table 4 simultaneously faint.
This batch is substandard. The structural integrity is weak.
The integrity is fine, I yelled over the hiss of the espresso machine. You just like the sugar rush. Rourke, that is a customer's order. Put it down. He paused, holding a cupcake halfway to his mouth. He looked at me with those golden eyes that could stop armies, feigning innocence. Then, slowly, deliberately, he took a bite, maintaining eye contact the entire time.
Delicious, he smirked.
"I'm firing you," I groaned, grabbing a rag to wipe down the counter. "I am literally firing you. Get out of my kitchen. Go run the country. Go sign a law. Go do king things." "I am doing king things," he countered, swallowing the cupcake whole. "I am supporting local business, and I'm guarding the assets." He wasn't joking about the guarding part. While he played the role of the bored trophy husband, the bakery was the safest place on earth. When a rude customer had snapped his fingers at Leo last week, Rourke hadn't roared. He just walked up behind the guy and stood there, silent and looming, until the customer apologized, tipped 50%, and left walking very quickly. Leo slid past me, carrying a tray of dirty mugs. "He's doing it again, Quinn," Leo whispered loud enough for Rourke to hear. "He's glaring at the delivery guy." "He's not glaring," I sighed. "That's just his resting face." I walked out from behind the counter, dodging the line of customers who were all holding up their phones to film the royal baker in his natural habitat. I marched up to Rourke, grabbed the piping bag from his massive hand, and pointed a stern finger at his chest. "Break time," I commanded. Rourke arched an eyebrow. "Is that an order, chef?" "Yes, sit." He sat. The Alpha King, the most powerful predator on the continent, sat on a rickety wooden stool because I told him to. He pulled me between his knees, wrapping his arms around my waist, uncaring that he was getting flour on his $1,000 trousers. "You look tired," he murmured, his thumb rubbing a soothing circle on my hip. "I'm exhausted," I admitted, leaning into him for a second. "We sold out of the King's concussion eclairs in 10 minutes. I can't bake them fast enough." "Maybe we should expand," he suggested, his voice low. "Buy the block. Build a factory." "No factory," I said firmly, tapping his nose with a floury finger. "Clause 3. The bakery stays independent. I like the chaos. It keeps you humble." He chuckled, capturing my hand and kissing the flour off my knuckles. "I am very humble." "Liar." "I am," he insisted. "I'm letting you drive the Aston Martin tonight." "You're letting me drive it because you lost the bet about the sourdough starter," I reminded him. He grinned, that devastating boyish grin that he only ever showed to me. The crowd snapped photos, the flashes popping like distant fireworks. But he didn't look at them. He only saw me. "Quinn," he whispered, leaning in so his forehead rested against mine. "Happy anniversary." "It's been 6 months. Rourke, that's not an anniversary." "It is," he said. "It's been 6 months since you didn't run away." I softened, the stress of the lunch rush melting away. "I'm not running anywhere, Wolf. I have a contract and a very expensive car to drive." "Good." He kissed me, quick and hard, a promise sealed in sugar and possessiveness. "Now get back to work. I need another cupcake." I rolled my eyes and pulled away, swatting his shoulder. "Pay for it first." As I turned back to the counter, ready to face the horde of customers, my eyes drifted to the wall behind the register, the place of honor. There were no awards there, no diplomas, no newspaper clippings. Instead, mounted inside a velvet-lined shadow box with museum-quality glass, was a heavy, black, well-seasoned, cast-iron skillet. It had a small dent on the bottom edge. Beneath it, a gold plaque gleamed under the bakery lights, bearing the inscription Rourke had commissioned himself. "The Kingmaker, In case of emergency, break glass. Property of the Queen. I smiled at the weapon that started a war and ended with a wedding. I grabbed a fresh tray of dough, winked at my husband, and got back to work. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you loved the frying pan drama, this next story is even wilder. Her pug literally pees on the Alpha King's Italian shoes, and instead of raging, he smirks and asks if she's marking her territory. It's pure chaos. Click the video on your screen right now to watch Bad Dog. Do it!